I have an interesting topic, securing and supporting investment in Africa, whether it is too late. To be honest, when I got the topic, I thought it was a joke because it can never really be too late for Africa. If anything, it is more the opposite. If we look at global FDI flows over a 5-year period from 2012 to 2016, Africa has got what I consider to be an insufficient share of the global flows, only 4%. And while global flows have risen in that period from 2012 to 2016, not materially, from 1.6 trillion to 1.7, the share that has come to Africa has actually fallen. It's fallen and then it's concentrated. 5 countries account for 43% of the flows that came into the continent. So Africa only accounted for 4% of the overall flow, but Africa accounts for 13% of the world population and 2% of world GDP. So it's falling, it's concentrated. But if you look at how the world will look in 2050, and I know that you guys understand this much better than I do, we invest not because of the past or the present, we invest principally because of the future. And if we look at how the world will look in 2050, Africa will be the fastest growing continent. It'll be the second largest with 5.3 billion people of 9.7 by 2050. If you look at the countries that will make the biggest change, so China will no longer be the biggest country. India will replace it. And Nigeria will move from its current position of 8th to 3rd, replacing the US as the 3rd most populous country. Obviously, population suggests markets, but it is even more than that. It's what kind of market this is. The World Bank estimates that Africa's demographic dividend could generate 11 to 15% GDP growth between 2011 and 2030. So the highest number of young people on the continent will be in Africa. In fact, the 10 youngest countries currently are in Africa. But the larger of the 3 pictures show the view even more clearly. And young people mean jobs, young people mean the need for goods and services, new iPhones, new clothing trends, food to eat, and the like. So when people say that there's a growth story in Africa, I believe that growth story to be real. EY does an attractiveness survey on a periodic basis, and their 2015 version showed that 24 of the 13 fastest growing economies that they surveyed will be in Africa. So 24 of 39, 24 of the 39 countries they expect to grow by more than 5% will be in Africa. But when people talk about Africa generally, I find there's a big perception issue that Africa first needs to deal with. Again, EY have a survey that actually demonstrates that wide perception gap. So those who are present on the continent, who have invested on the continent, consider it to be the most attractive investment destination, whereas those who have no exposure to the continent consider it to be the second least attractive. It's such a massive gap. Interestingly, even those who don't have any exposure to the continent believe that the attractiveness will improve over the next 3 years and that it has improved over time. So when people make, comments that I consider inappropriate about different countries in Africa or about the continent, I understand where they're coming from. It was something we thought anecdotally. This EY survey confirms it. And if you look at the capital that has come to the continent, historically, extractives have attracted the most FDI. Again, that's not surprising because of the high number of countries on the continent that have the most resources of different minerals in the world. But the extractive sector, while it might attract a lot of capital, actually doesn't create that many jobs. And Africa needs more than just capital. Clearly, Africa needs capital, but Africa also needs jobs. So we need jobs across a number of sectors, and we need different skill sets. We don't want a lot of small-scale, low-paying jobs, which is what you largely get in agriculture. We also don't want, at the other end of the scale, with business services, a high number of intellectual property, knowledge-based jobs. Sorry, a low number of knowledge-based jobs, because there are a lot of people to be employed. So we need a variety across the spectrum. It's not just one or the other. And most African countries, struggle to get what is due to them, but struggle for good reason, because of a, number of issues that, again, we all know about. Corruption, competitiveness, instability, a difficult business environment. There's a study that was done again, but actually it's not a study. But if you look at the World Bank's ease of doing business rankings and you plot it against economic prosperity, you actually find that there's a strong correlation between economic prosperity and ease of doing business. And I guess many countries in Africa realize this to be true. So most African countries are doing a lot to improve their business environments. Again, looking to the World Bank reports, there are over 100 projects in about 70 countries. Most of those projects, these are reform initiatives that are aimed at improving the business environment, and the bulk of them are in Africa. Now, when we talk about investments and we talk about Africa, it's only in summary slides. I don't know whether you believe everything I've said. I believe some of it, but I don't believe all of it. Because when it comes to investments, there is nothing like Africa. There is Ghana, there is Uganda, there is Nigeria. If you don't believe me, the next time you get a visa to Ghana, try to use it to enter Nigeria or vice versa. So when we talk about reforms, I like to talk about reforms on a country-specific basis. And as it happens, for my sins, I work for the Nigerian Investment Promotion Commission, so I'll share with you some of what we are doing in Nigeria. In order to address the difficulty of the business environment, there are many problems, obviously, but the business environment is a material one. Nigeria inaugurated a council that is chaired by the Vice President himself, the Presidential Enabling Business Environment Council, that has over 10 ministers supporting, and the head of the civil service, because the reforms obviously involve the civil servants. The objective of this council, which was inaugurated last July, was to achieve at least a 20-point movement in Nigeria's ease of doing business ranking, and to remove all the bottlenecks, all the impediments that make it difficult for business to be conducted in Nigeria. We're delighted, that the council delivered on its mandate. I'm not very proud of this slide, I have to say. Nigeria moved from 169 to 190. Sorry, from 169 of 190 to 145 of 190. That's like coming home to say, last year I got an F, this year I got a D. It's still a D. So we're not proud of where we are, but we've demonstrated that it is possible. And this is the beginning for Nigeria. This is not where we're stopping. We're certainly focused on continuous reforms. So over the last 12 months, there have been reforms. Essentially, the bulk of them affect SMEs because of the multitude of SMEs that exist in Nigeria. We see the reforms not as trying to simply record improvements in the World Bank's ease of doing business ranking, but in actually making it easier for business to be conducted in Nigeria. So there are a number of reforms that the World Bank does not track, but that we consider important for SMEs in Nigeria. And there have been material improvements that have been recorded. The number of documents required to export goods from 10 to 7. You can now open a business online. You can file your taxes at the federal level, and for 2 states currently online. It's easier to enter and leave Nigeria. But the ultimate objective of the reforms is not to simply record a thing or two here, but to institutionalize those reforms, to continue collaboration across several government agencies, and to ensure that we have continuous improvement. So the essence is that business reforms, just like trade facilitation, investor facilitation, will help unlock, some of the impediments. I used to work as the chairman of the session said. We say chairman in Nigeria, whatever the title is, we just say chairman because it sounds, it sounds appropriate. But as the chairman of the session said, I used to work in the private sector, and I crossed over to the fund side because I believe the private sector needs their own person on the inside to help unlock some of the impediments. So I actually see myself representing your interest on the inside, on the government side. I have a lot more to say than they gave me time for. So to ensure that we have time for Q&A, I will stop here, but I'm going to keep clicking. So if you have any questions, I will take them. But like I said, I work for Nigeria's Investment Promotion Commission, and I cannot come here and talk about, the potential of the continent without talking about Nigeria. It is that country that I believe to, be more than just any. And if you look at the shape of the African continent, it's shaped like a gun. If you hold it at the top end, it's a long barrel gun. If you hold it at the bottom end, it's a short barrel gun. Maybe you guys don't know about guns. When I said this in America, they all understood it. But whether you hold it at the top or you hold it at the bottom, guess what? Nigeria is where it should be as the trigger for development on the continent. Thank you.